Strange Events in the United Kingdom since 1900 by Piers Smythe Jones. Prologue. Britain. A land stitched together by centuries of empire, invention, and eccentricity. A place of hedgerow lanes, crooked church spires, and weathered pub signs creaking in the wind. But beneath that familiar surface lies something else, something far stranger. Since 1900, this island nation has been home to some of the most puzzling, eerie, and downright peculiar events ever recorded. Things that defy logic, baffle experts, and leave behind nothing but questions. Lighthouse keepers who vanish without a trace. Stoneheads that seem to awaken ancient forces. Talking animals. Flying beasts. A spaceman who photobombed a family outing in Cumbria. This is not a ghost story collection, dear listener. This is a factual account. Every story in the chapters ahead was reported in newspapers, witnessed by multiple people, or investigated by police and scientists alike. We make no claims of certainty. We leave that to you. But as you step into these tales, keep your wits about you, and your sense of adventure close at hand. Because Britain is not just a country of history, it's a country of mystery. Chapter 1. The Mystery of Eilean Mòr, 1900. The waves crash endlessly against the rocks of the Flannan Isles, a lonely cluster of islets off the west coast of Scotland. Few go there willingly. Fewer still stay overnight. But in December 1900, 3 men did just that, and none of them were ever seen again. The men were lighthouse keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, tasked with maintaining the newly built lighthouse on Eilean Mòr. Isolated from the mainland by 50 miles of turbulent sea, their only contact came by supply boat every few weeks. On the 15th of December, the light went out. Passing ships noted the dark tower on the cliffs, but assumed it was a mechanical fault. It wasn't until December 26th that a boat finally made the treacherous crossing to investigate. What they found chilled the search crew to the bone. The entrance gate was closed. The front door was locked. Inside, a meal lay uneaten on the kitchen table. One chair had been toppled, as if someone had risen in haste. The oil lamps were filled. The beds, untouched. But the men, gone. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no bodies, nothing. Just a half-written log, where the entries grew increasingly odd. Severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen. The sea is raging. God is over all. But here's the thing. No storm was recorded on that day. In fact, the weather was calm. And so the theories began. Some blamed a rogue wave, sweeping the men from the cliff. Others suggested madness, a fight perhaps, or a suicide pact. Then there were those who whispered of something darker. Celtic legend tells of spirits and sea devils that haunt the Flannan Isles. Local fishermen always spoke of the place with hushed voices. One even refused to land his boat there, calling it a place the Lord forgot. To this day, the men's bodies have never been found. Their disappearance was never solved. The lighthouse remains automated now, its lights sweeping across the sea each night. And when it cuts across the cliffs of Eilean Mòr, you might wonder, if only for a moment, is someone still watching from the rocks? Chapter 2. The Black Flash of Cannock Chase, 1937. It began, as many strange tales do, with a scream in the night. Cannock Chase, Staffordshire. A place of winding lanes, deep woods, and silent hollows, once scarred by coal mining and war. By 1937, the chase had become a quiet patch of countryside again. Walkers, cyclists, and children on summer picnics. But that spring, something stirred beneath the branches, and those who saw it would never forget. On April 12th, a young milkman by the name of Harold Brooks was pedalling down Slitting Mill Road before sunrise. The dew still clung to the hedgerows. The wheels of his bicycle whispered against the gravel. He was humming some Glenn Miller tune, eyes half-lidded with sleep. Then he heard it, a shriek. Not the cry of a bird or fox, but something human, guttural, wild. He slammed on the brakes. On that 12th. It weren't no woman, nor man neither. More like a devil. It ran at me, tall, black, like a bloke in tar, but too fast, too bendy. I dropped the milk and rode like hell. By mid-morning, word had spread through the village like fire through dry wheat. They called it the Black Flash, and over the next 5 weeks, the sightings kept coming. The eyewitness accounts. Tuesday, April 13th. Doris Fenwick, age 47, reported something leaping her back fence in the village of Etching Hill. She said it stood 6 feet tall, wore no clothing, and moved like a rubber man. Wednesday, April 14th. 2 coal workers near the disused valley pit swore they saw a black figure with silver eyes dart across the railway line. 1 fainted. Saturday, April 17th. Local constable Ernest Leach was called to investigate reports of a peeping Tom at the Greenheath allotments. He never found the man, but returned to the station with blood on his hands and a torn sleeve. He refused to speak of it. By the end of April, local headlines screamed, "The Black Flash strikes again. Woman chased through woods. No footprints found." What made the case all the more bizarre was that no 2 sightings were quite the same. Some described a tall man, dressed in black oilskin, like a diver or fireman. Others claimed the figure had no clothes at all, just slick, shiny black skin that gleamed in the moonlight. A few witnesses said it moved like a monkey. Others called it a ghost, but almost everyone agreed on 2 details. It was fast, and it was silent. The search begins. On May 2nd, the Staffordshire Constabulary launched an official investigation. Dozens of officers combed Cannock Chase, joined by volunteer scouts, dogs, and even an early Royal Observer Corps aircraft. They found nothing. No prints, no fibers, no disturbed earth. Just an occasional patch of crushed bracken, and once, a strange oily residue on a fence post that evaporated before it could be collected. There is clearly a person or creature disturbing the peace around the chase. However, despite the abundance of eyewitnesses, we have failed to identify any individual or animal matching the descriptions provided. By the 3rd week of May, the Black Flash had stopped appearing altogether. Just gone. The theories. So what was it? Theory 1. A prankster. Some claimed it was a young man from Rugeley in a leather suit, terrifying locals for fun. But no suit was ever found. No one came forward, and those who had seen the flash said it moved far too fast to be human. Theory 2. A ghost. Cannock Chase has long been associated with hauntings. Roman soldiers, phantom children, spectral miners. Was the Black Flash another restless spirit? Theory 3. A cryptid. The UK has its own share of monster lore. Could this have been some unknown animal species, escaped, mutated, or prehistoric? Theory 4. Mass hysteria. Some experts argue that one vivid encounter, publicized in newspapers, can lead to a chain reaction of imagined sightings. A cultural echo chamber. But here's the sticking point. Multiple police officers gave formal written statements. So did a pair of Royal Engineers. These weren't drunkards or daydreamers. These were trained men, scared out of their wits. The Reawakening, 1986. Just when the Black Flash had faded into local legend, something strange happened, nearly 50 years later. In 1986, 2 hikers camping in the same woodland near Castle Ring reported being awoken in the night by an oily-skinned figure moving upright on all 4s. They fled their tent barefoot and didn't return for their gear. The police found nothing, but in the nearby trees, they found claw marks, 7 feet up. A phantom or a warning? So what became of the Black Flash? Is it merely a story from the age of telegrams and ration books? Or something that waits, biding time in the gorse and pine? Locals still talk about it, usually over pints in hushed tones. Children dare each other to walk Slitting Mill Road after dark. Occasionally, a photo surfaces, blurry, distant, unconvincing. But the feeling remains, that something lives or haunts deep in the woods of Cannock Chase. Something that watches, that waits, and perhaps one day will run again. Chapter 3. Geth the Talking Mongoose, 1931. Of all the strange tales that echo across the British Isles, few are as delightfully absurd and stubbornly unexplained as the one that comes from a lonely farmhouse on the Isle of Man in the early 1930s. This wasn't a haunting, nor was it a UFO sighting or a monster in the loch. No, this was a mongoose, a talking mongoose, named Geth. And if the reports are to be believed, he was not only intelligent, but sarcastic, musical, fluent in multiple languages, and an enthusiastic gossip. The Irvings of Cashan's Gap. The story begins in 1931 at a remote cottage called Cashan's Gap, nestled near the village of Dalby on the windswept west coast of the Isle of Man. The Irving family lived there. James, a retired commercial traveller, his wife Margaret, and their 13-year-old daughter Vory. Theirs was a modest life. A few chickens, a vegetable patch. Long, quiet evenings under stormy skies. Until the scratching started. At first, they thought it was rats. Then the scratching turned to thumping, and the thumping to whispering. Low murmurs behind the wooden panels of the walls. And then, one night, it spoke. I am a ghost in the form of a weasel, and I shall haunt you. A voice in the wall. Within days, the voice grew louder and cheekier. It would mimic the family's conversations, shout insults from inside the walls, sing old hymns and bawdy songs. It responded to questions, corrected their spelling, cursed like a sailor, and then recited poems with impeccable rhythm. James Irving, a practical man, asked the voice what it was. I am Geth, and I am an extra clever mongoose. It claimed to have been born in Delhi, India, in 1852. He said he had once travelled with men, afore finding himself stranded on the Isle of Man. According to Geth, he lived on mice, biscuits, and whatever food the Irvings left out. He refused to be seen, but offered a compromise. If they left out a mirror, he'd let them glimpse him watching from behind furniture or rafters. Vory claimed to see him often. He was the size of a small rat with a yellowish body and a bushy tail. His eyes were sharp like pinpoints. And he grinned. Housemate or hoax? Naturally, word of a supernatural mongoose spread quickly across the island, and soon across the sea. Journalists, parapsychologists, and even representatives of the British Society for Psychical Research made the trek to Cashan's Gap. None were disappointed. Though Geth would rarely speak in the presence of strangers, he'd often throw objects, knock loudly on walls, or whistle tauntingly from the shadows. One investigator, Captain Harold Dennis Price, wrote, "The Irvings are honest folk, seemingly baffled by the events in their home. But I cannot fully endorse the phenomenon as genuine, given the lack of verifiable evidence of the creature." Skeptics pointed to Vory, now a teenager. Could she be throwing her voice? Some thought it was an elaborate ventriloquism trick, but others, including hardened reporters, claimed the voice came from places no child could reach, deep behind beams or high in the attic. And then there were Geth's secrets. Geth the gossip. Geth had a habit of reporting things he shouldn't know. He'd describe who visited the neighbors. He once quoted a private conversation from the village pub, verbatim. On another occasion, he warned James Irving not to trust a traveling merchant who would shorten your eggs and thieve your silver. The merchant never returned to Dalby. Stranger still, one night, Vory fell ill with fever. Geth stopped speaking entirely. He remained silent for days. Then, without warning, he resumed, but his voice was slower, less sharp. I thought she would die. If she died, I'd go too. I'm her spirit twin, in a way. A few weeks later, he disappeared entirely. No scratching, no singing, no gossip, until spring. When a reporter from the Manchester Daily Dispatch visited the house in May 1932, he was treated to a spectacular display. Books flying from shelves, eggs exploding, and a long hissing voice from under the stove, shouting, "You're a fat man and you smell of boiled cabbage." Photographs and footprints. Despite the wild stories, tangible evidence of Geth was hard to come by. James Irving once managed to take a photo of a small, blurry creature near the rafters, but critics dismissed it as a stuffed animal. Others claimed to find tiny paw prints in the mud outside the kitchen door, but they didn't match any known mammal. Interestingly, some prints appeared to show 4 fingers and 3 toes, spaced like a hand, more than a paw. None were ever conclusively identified. Oh, the decline of Geth. By 1935, Geth spoke less and less. The voice grew hoarse. He became withdrawn, only occasionally tapping on the walls to remind the Irvings he was still there. Some say his last known words were delivered on a bitter night in February. I am getting tired now. I think I shall go away. Goodbye. And just like that, he was gone. What became of the Irvings? James Irving died in 1945. The house, long falling into disrepair, was sold and later demolished. No trace of Geff was found inside. Vori, now grown, rarely spoke of her strange childhood. In a 1970s interview, she said, "Geff was real. I didn't make him up. I wish I had, because people treated us like fools. But he was there. We all heard him." She passed away in 2005, still holding to her story. The legacy of Geff, to this day. The tale of Geff the talking mongoose remains one of the most bizarre in British paranormal history. No one has definitively proven it to be true or false. Some believe it was a case of shared delusion. Others think Vori, perhaps lonely and imaginative, created an elaborate fantasy that her parents came to accept. A few diehards insist Geff was a genuine supernatural entity, perhaps a tulpa, a thought form brought to life through belief. Whatever the truth, Geff has entered folklore. He's appeared in comic books, songs, and documentaries. Paranormal investigators still trek to the fields near where Cashin's Gap once stood, hoping for a whisper in the reeds. A ghost in the form of a weasel, a spirit twin, a clever mongoose from India. Call him what you will, dear listener. But in the lonely hills of the Isle of Man, they still say, when the wind is just right, you can hear him laughing. Chapter 4. The Phantom RAF Squadron, 1940s, 1990s. There's a silence to the hills of Derbyshire that sinks into your bones, a quietness between the stones, between the trees, that makes you feel, somehow, you're not alone. And on certain nights, if the mist hangs low and the wind comes from the west, you might hear it. The unmistakable rumble of aircraft engines, a roar that swells and swirls in the valley, lights flashing above the peaks. But when you look up, there's nothing there. The ghost planes begin. The first reports came during the Second World War. Pilots stationed at RAF Harper Hill near Buxton and RAF Darley Moor near Ashbourne began speaking in hushed tones about strange sightings. They described shadow aircraft moving low and fast across the moors, sometimes against the wind, sometimes flying without sound, but always identifiable as World War II era bombers, Wellingtons, Halifaxes, and even Lancasters, with their iconic silhouettes and steady gliding wings. The stories might have been dismissed, chalked up to exhaustion, nerves, or wartime trauma, if it weren't for one detail. They never showed up on radar. Patrol 17C, 2200 hours. Visual on what appeared to be a friendly Lancaster. Altitude, 300 feet. Heading northeast. No transponder, no radio. Vanished behind ridge. No contact. This entry came from October 1944. The war was still raging. The skies above Britain were crowded with the machines of battle. But the radar team at RAF Ringway saw no aircraft at that time. Not then. Not ever. Post-war phenomena. The war ended. Britain exhaled. But the ghost planes didn't stop. In the 1950s, shepherds near Hope Valley spoke of giant bombers flying so low the sheep scattered. In the 60s, hikers on Kinder Scout ducked instinctively as a roaring aircraft passed overhead, only to see an empty sky moments later. I felt the heat of it, that close. It shook my pack. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and no trail behind it. It just wasn't there. In 1970, a police constable named Roger Hegarty was driving the Snake Pass near Glossop when a massive black plane passed just feet above his patrol car. I stopped the vehicle and got out. I was sure it had crashed. Nothing could fly that low and not hit. But there was no smoke, no wreckage, nothing. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch found no record of a missing plane that day. No pilots reported mechanical issues, and yet dozens of witnesses came forward. Many described the same thing. A vintage four-engine aircraft. No sound, or too much sound. A nose emblem resembling a snarling wolf or a bomb. One man even claimed to see the pilot. He was wearing goggles, and his mouth was open, frozen in what looked like a scream. The Peak District Triangle, between Buxton, Glossop, and Matlock, lies what some now call the Peak District Triangle, a zone of repeated, unexplained aerial phenomena. Locals keep a quiet record. A butcher in Chapel en la Frith had a notebook with 37 separate sightings between 1942 and 1989. A scoutmaster from Edale claimed to see the same plane pass overhead on the same date, 2 years in a row. Each time it flew northwest. Just after 9 p.m., same shape, same lights, like time was stuck for that one moment. A farmer's daughter told her schoolteacher in 1979 that she saw a flying house made of metal with its lights blinking like eyes. Her mother hushed her up, but the girl never forgot. Modern witnesses, 1990s and beyond. You'd think that with better radar and more regulated airspace, the sightings would fade. They didn't. In 1995, a group of hang gliders launching from Mam Tor were nearly hit by what they believed was a vintage warbird. The instructor later said, "I know the difference between an illusion and reality. This thing passed so close we felt its slipstream. It had propellers, it had markings, but there was no engine noise, nothing at all." In 1997, a local BBC radio crew attempted to record audio for a ghost hunting special near the Derwent Dam. At exactly 8:47 p.m., their microphone picked up a distant, rhythmic droning, followed by the sharp crack of air displacement, like a low flyover. They published the recording. No one could explain it. The Dam Busters connection. One popular theory connects the Phantom Squadron to the famous 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, who trained over the Derwent Reservoir in preparation for their 1943 mission. Indeed, their iconic Avro Lancasters flew low along the waterline in secret night drills, echoing off the hills. Some say the ghost planes are residual energy, caught in a loop, that the trauma, precision, and sacrifice of that era imprinted itself on the land. Others suggest something stranger. The Lost Squadron theory. In 1944, a training flight of 3 Avro Lancasters from RAF Woodhall Spa was diverted during poor weather conditions. They were last seen heading west toward the peaks. They never arrived. No wreckage was found. No bodies. No parachutes. The military ruled it a navigational accident. But RAF maps from the time show no explanation for their detour. Local folklore now claims these are the very aircraft seen today, trapped in time, circling endlessly, trying to find their base. Rational explanations. Of course, there are more grounded theories. Infrasound. Low-frequency vibrations caused by wind over the terrain can produce a sensation of pressure and dread. Some researchers believe this can even create auditory hallucinations, like the rumble of engines. False memories, war stories passed down, combined with the occasional RAF flyover, might congeal into imagined sightings. Retroactive suggestion. Once you hear the legend, you're more likely to think you've experienced it too. But that doesn't explain the police reports. The audio recordings. All the people who swore they saw details, cockpit lights, tail numbers, and even the shocked expressions of the crew. A final sighting. In 1999, a retired radar technician named Gordon Mears took a late evening walk along the Burbage Brook. He was not a man prone to fantasy. At precisely 9:15 p.m., he heard what he described as a mechanical humming, like 4 engines perfectly in sync. He looked up and saw a black shape glide silently overhead, a large aircraft with roundels on the wings and a flash of red under the nose. He followed it as far as the ridge. Then it vanished. There was no contrail, no noise. I could see through parts of it, almost like smoke shaped into a bomber. It didn't fly away. It just wasn't there anymore. The sound of ghosts. Whether it's a trick of light, a glitch in time, or the echoes of those who never returned, the skies over Derbyshire remain watchful. Every year, a few more reports trickle in. A shadow overhead, a noise that shouldn't be there, lights in the fog, and always the same questions. Where are they going? Why do they fly still? And do they know they're dead? Chapter 5. Imber, the village that disappeared. 1943. Nestled in the heart of the Salisbury Plain, hidden among rolling chalk hills and wind-swept fields, once lay a village called Imber. It had a pub. It had a church. It had a post office. a blacksmith, and around 50 homes. It had laughter in its lanes, and bells in its tower. And then, one day, it was gone. A living village. For over 1,000 years, people had lived in Imber. Its name appears in the Domesday Book. It was never a wealthy place, just a humble farming community on the wide Wiltshire plain. By the early 20th century, the population hovered around 150. Children walked to the one-room schoolhouse. The White Horse Inn served beer brewed in devices. Life was quiet, wind-chapped, and timeless. Farmers worked the land. Shepherds tended flocks on the downs. Church bells at St. Giles rang out on Sunday morning, echoing across the green. That was until the army came knocking. A letter and a deadline. In November of 1943, as the Second World War raged across Europe, the British War Office issued formal notices to every household in Imber. Due to military necessity, the village of Imber and its surrounding land will be requisitioned for training purposes. All residents are hereby required to vacate their homes no later than December 17th. They were given just 47 days to pack up their lives. We were told it was temporary, that we'd come back after the war, so we left our curtains up. We left our clocks ticking. We even left the teacups on the sideboard. No compensation, no argument, no chance to stay. The War Office assured the villagers they would be able to return. They never did. A village for war. Why Imber? It wasn't just remote, it was perfectly remote. The Salisbury Plain had already become a military zone in places, used for artillery training and tank maneuvers. Imber's isolation made it an ideal site for testing urban combat, especially in preparation for the Allied invasion of Europe. The army wanted buildings, streets, an English village empty, and so they took it. Troops rolled in, houses were gutted and repurposed. The church was used for drills. Live ammunition was fired through cottage windows. St. Giles' graveyard, centuries old, was surrounded by barbed wire. In its place stood sandbags, target silhouettes, and bullet-riddled doors. One resident, Albert Nash, returned months later to find his living room window used for bayonet practice. His radio, still plugged in, lay smashed beneath a soldier's boot print. Promises broken. After the war ended in 1945, hope returned to the hearts of those displaced. Letters were sent to the Ministry of Defence. Questions were asked in Parliament. The villagers waited, but the army did not leave. They issued a new statement. Imber was now a permanent military training site. There would be no return. These people were removed under a wartime promise. It is unconscionable that they be refused return. The government stonewalled. Security concerns, operational necessity, national interest. 1,000 years of village life erased in less than 2 months. And now, legally, it belonged to the state. The fight for Imber. But the villagers did not give up. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, former residents and their families held annual protests. They returned on foot, often dodging checkpoints, to see the ruins of their homes. In 1961, a group broke through the wire and held a memorial service in St. Giles. Soldiers stood at the gate. Nobody was arrested. And then something miraculous happened. The ministry relented, slightly. They agreed to allow one church service per year at Imber, on condition that the public leave afterwards. And so began the Imber pilgrimage. The annual return. Every year, usually in late August, the gates are opened. Civilians line up. Buses arrive from Warminster. Police tape marks out the paths. And for one day only, the Church of St. Giles comes alive. The organ plays. Flowers are placed on cracked headstones. Voices fill the nave. And in the pews sit those who remember the village, not as rubble, but as home. Vory Shortridge was christened at St. Giles in 1937. She returned 70 years later to light a candle in the same spot where her mother once sang hymns. But when I walk into that church, I remember everything. The lambs, the milk cart, the sun on the well. Outside, Imber remains frozen in time. The pub is roofless. The blacksmith's forge has collapsed. Many homes are just shells. windowless, scorched, patched with concrete for training purposes. The army has since built fake buildings nearby, mock Afghan villages, mock Balkan squares, for modern combat simulation. But the real village, the soul of Imber, remains locked in the past. A village on the map, but not in life. If you look at an Ordnance Survey map, Imber is still there, named, marked, as if it never left. But you cannot drive there, you cannot live there, you cannot even walk its streets, except for that one weekend a year. The sign at the gate reads, Ministry of Defence Land, Danger, Unexploded Ordnance, Do Not Enter. And so, Imber has become something unique. Not a ghost town, for its people are still alive. Not a war memorial, for there was no battle. Not a ruin, for it was never destroyed by an enemy. It is a village that was taken, and one that perhaps still waits. Whispers among the stones. There are those who say Imber isn't as empty as it seems. Soldiers on night exercises have spoken of strange lights in the fog. Radios that crackle with voices not their own. Footsteps on floors that no longer exist. One guardsman in 1982 claimed to see a woman in a blue dress standing inside the post office. Just standing, watching. When he shone his torch on the space, it was empty. Just bricks and vines. Another officer heard children laughing in the schoolhouse, long since collapsed. Unusual atmosphere. Team reluctant to enter certain structures. Uneasy sensation, like being watched. Maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's memory embedded in stone. Or maybe, just maybe, the spirit of Imber remains, waiting for its people to come home. A place between worlds. And so, dear listener, we remember Imber, a village that disappeared, not through time or myth, but through the pen of government and the gears of war. It stands as a strange monument, to promises broken, to homes taken, to the eerie way a place can remain, even when no one lives there. Next time you cross Salisbury Plain, look east toward the hills, and listen for bells. Chapter 6. The Beast of Bodmin Moor, 1980s to present. They say it hunts under cover of fog, that it slinks between the granite tors and ancient hedgerows of Cornwall's Bodmin Moor. Silent as shadow, swift as lightning. Farmers call it a menace, ramblers call it a myth, but the locals, they call it the beast. A wild and empty place, Bodmin Moor, a raw, rugged wilderness sprawled across northeastern Cornwall. 200 square kilometers of granite, gorse, and bog. Mist settles here like a shroud. Sheep wander freely, and at night you can walk for miles and never see another soul. It's a place of Neolithic stone circles and tin mine ruins. A place old enough to remember the Druids, and wild enough that nature still rules. And for nearly 40 years now, it has been home to one of Britain's most persistent mysteries. The first killings. It began quietly. In the early 1980s, farmers around Camelford and St. Neot started finding dead sheep on their land. Not unusual in itself. Foxes, wild dogs, even poachers could be blamed. But the wounds were strange. Throats slashed cleanly, rib cages gnawed, eyes missing, and no sign of scavengers. At first, it was chalked up to bad luck or badgers. Then, in January 1983, a farmer named Alec Jacobs found 3 of his ewes mauled in a single night. 2 had been dragged across fences. 1 was half-eaten, her spine snapped in 2. There were no tracks, no prints, no blood trail, just claw marks on the wooden gate, 5 inches apart. It weren't a dog. I've seen dogs take down sheep. This was clean, precise, like it was practiced. Word spread. The newspapers caught on. Mystery predator stalks more. Sheep slaughtered. Police baffled. Is this the beast of Bodmin? And with the headlines came the stories. The sightings begin. One night in July 1984, a postal worker driving home after a late shift swerved to avoid a huge black cat crossing the road near Altarnun. He said its eyes glowed in the headlights and its tail was longer than its body. In 1985, schoolchildren on a field trip near Brown Willie saw what they described as a massive panther prowling a ridgeline. Their teacher, Elaine Mabley, later confirmed she saw it too. It wasn't a dog. I know what I saw. It was feline, jet black, about the size of a Labrador, but with a different gait. Smooth, low to the ground, terrifying. From then on, the beast was everywhere. In the headlines, in the pub chatter, on grainy camcorder footage. Dark shapes crossing hillsides. Eyeshine in the night. Locals gave it a name, the Beast of Bodmin Moor. Government involvement. By the early 1990s, the sightings had grown too frequent and too public to ignore. In 1995, under pressure from farmers and media, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, MAFF, launched an official investigation into the beast. Their conclusion? There is no verifiable evidence of a wild cat population in Bodmin Moor. The livestock deaths, while unfortunate, are consistent with known predator behavior. But not everyone was convinced. A month after the report's release, a 14-year-old boy discovered a large skull in the River Fowey with distinctive feline teeth and what appeared to be a panther-like jaw. Experts at the Natural History Museum examined it. Their verdict: a leopard. But imported, likely part of a rug or trophy. Was it a prank or a sign? Escaped pets. One popular theory centers on the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, 1976. This law required private owners of exotic animals, like pumas, leopards, and lynxes, to obtain licenses and secure enclosures. Many could not afford the compliance. The theory goes that some owners, rather than surrender their pets, simply let them go, quietly, into the wild. And where better than Bodmin? Wide open space, plentiful prey, sparse population. It would be the perfect place for a big cat to vanish and thrive. But that doesn't explain everything. More than one? Witness descriptions vary. Some report black panther-like creatures, sleek, muscular, long-tailed. Others claim to see tawny pumas with lighter coats and rounded heads. A few even speak of striped beasts, though none matching any known species. Could there be more than one? A small breeding population, perhaps? Descendants of long-lost pets, or as some whisper, something older. There are tales buried in Cornish folklore of shadow creatures that stalk the moors. Shuck spirits, phantom felines, guardians of ancient stones. Mere legend, perhaps. But even myths begin somewhere. The Bodmin Incident, 1998. On a crisp November morning in 1998, 21-year-old hiker Jamie Layton was walking near Rough Tor when he heard rustling in the gorse. Assuming it was a sheep, he continued, until he saw it. It was big, maybe 5 feet long, black, low to the ground. It didn't run, it flowed, like ink across the rocks. And the eyes, they were yellow. I froze. I couldn't even lift my camera. It was gone in seconds. A week later, another walker, Jenny Pine, found a half-eaten fox carcass nearby. Its skull was crushed. The bike radius matched no native species. She reported it to the police. Nothing was found, but the legend surged again. Photographs, footage, and doubt. Over the decades, dozens of photos and videos have emerged, grainy, shaky, distant. Some show large cat-like silhouettes moving through brush. Others capture glowing eyes in night vision. But critics say most are hoaxes. Dogs, shadows, out-of-focus tricks of the light. One famous clip, taken in 1994, appears to show a big cat stalking a rabbit before vanishing into reeds. Experts remain divided. Was it a real creature or a well-placed cutout? The problem is always the same. No body, no DNA, no confirmed tracks, and yet the sheep keep dying. Ongoing sightings. Even today, the reports continue. In 2012, a Bodmin plumber named Dave Kinnison captured an audio recording of what he called a deep, thrumming growl outside his van while parked near Colliford Lake. In 2016, a drone operator spotted a large black shape slinking along a field boundary. The footage, once again, was inconclusive. And just last year, in 2024, a holidaymaker from Bristol reported seeing a jet black animal with a tail like a whip dart across the A30. Local authorities dismissed it as a large dog. Locals rolled their eyes. A beast or a belief? So what is the beast of Bodmin Moor? A surviving predator? A long-lost pet gone feral? A myth given flesh by repetition and fear? Or something stranger? An echo of ancient memory stalking the modern world? We may never know, but one thing is certain. Something moves out there, between the stones and tors. It leaves no prints, makes no sound, but it watches and waits. Chapter 7, The Solway Firth Spaceman, 1964. It was supposed to be a perfect family day out, a picnic, a few photographs, a quiet moment among the wildflowers of northwest England. And then the photo came back from the developer. And there, standing behind the little girl in the white dress, was someone, or something, that no one remembered being there. Something that looked a lot like an astronaut. A day in the dunes. The date was May 23rd. 1964. The place? Bergmarsh, near the Solway Firth, an estuary dividing the Cumbrian coast from southwest Scotland. It's a peaceful place. Wind-blown grasses, distant seabirds, the occasional sheep. Jim Templeton, a firefighter from Carlisle, had brought his wife Annie and their 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth out for a picnic. He'd recently purchased a new camera, a Kodak SLR. Elizabeth wore her new summer dress, white with frilly sleeves. She posed among the buttercups. Jim took 3 photos. They stayed only an hour or so. No one else was around. A quiet, uneventful afternoon, or so it seemed. The photograph. A few days later, Jim collected the developed film. The first 2 photos were perfectly normal. Elizabeth smiling, squinting in the sun. But in the third, things took a strange turn. There she was again, standing in the same field. But behind her, over her left shoulder, stood a figure. Tall, white, bulky, with a large, domed helmet, and arms stiff at the sides. It looked, unmistakably, like an astronaut. There was no one there when I took the photo. I would have seen them. We were alone. He showed it to friends, then to Kodak. The photo experts were baffled. No signs of tampering, no double exposure, no reflection errors. They ruled out a development glitch. The photograph was real, but the figure, no one could explain it. The press gets involved. Local newspapers jumped on the story. Man snaps Mystery Spaceman. Who is the Solway Phantom? Fireman's family spooked by silent visitor. Jim and Annie were interviewed on BBC Radio. The photo made national headlines. Kodak offered £1,000 to anyone who could provide a plausible explanation. No one could. The figure didn't appear in the first or second shot, only the third. Elizabeth hadn't seen anyone, nor had Annie. And Jim? He swore on his life that the marsh had been empty. Stranger visitors. About a week after the story went public, Jim Templeton received a visit. 2 men in dark suits, identical ties, identical accents, neither local nor exactly foreign. They claimed to be from Her Majesty's government. No identification, just questions. They asked Jim to drive them back to the site where he took the photo. He agreed, though he found their manner unsettling. They referred to each other only as number 1 and number 2. They wanted to know about the weather, the birds, what I'd eaten that day. When Jim insisted no one had been present, they grew agitated. One said, cryptically, "You would be wise to forget this incident." Then they vanished, without a trace. The rocket connection. Around the same time, something equally strange occurred 6,000 miles away, in South Australia. At the Woomera rocket range, one of the most secretive British-Australian missile test sites. A scheduled Blue Streak missile launch was aborted moments before ignition. The reason? 2 technicians reported seeing figures on the firing range, described as 2 beings in white suits. When photos were reviewed, a blurry figure, tall, pale, humanoid, was visible at the edge of the launch site. What does this have to do with Jim Templeton? The missile in question was built in Cumbria, tested just weeks after the Solway photo. And the engineers involved in the launch? Many had come directly from the site near Bergmarsh. Coincidence? Or something more? Popular theories. In the years since, the Solway Spaceman has become one of the most debated photos in paranormal history. Let's explore the leading theories. 1. It was Annie, Jim's wife. Some believe she accidentally walked into frame, and the sunlight on her blue dress overexposed the image, making it appear white. The apparent helmet was just her hair. Counterpoint. Annie was wearing a light blue sleeveless sundress, and the figure in the photo clearly has white-sleeved arms and a helmet-like shape over the head. Also, why didn't she appear in any other photo? 2. A prank or double exposure. Digital experts have examined the image thoroughly. No signs of tampering. It's a single exposure on Kodak film. 3. A real person, unnoticed. Perhaps a man in a fencing suit, a beekeeper, a lost hiker in strange garb, but again, no one was seen. And the marsh is wide open. There's nowhere to hide. And no other photos from that roll show anyone nearby. 4. An entity. The most fringe theory claims the figure is non-human, a time traveler, an interdimensional visitor, or even a monitoring presence linked to the rocket tests. Proponents point to the strange timing, the aborted missile launch, the men in black, the figure's posture, unnatural, and its complete silence. Could it have been watching Elizabeth? Watching us? What did Elizabeth remember? For decades, Elizabeth Templeton remained silent about that day. But in a rare interview in 2014, she broke her silence. I don't remember anything strange. I remember the flowers and Dad telling me to hold still. But when I saw the photo later, I didn't know what it was. It frightened me. It still does. She confirmed that her mother hadn't walked behind her, that she had felt watched at the time, but brushed it off. She never spoke publicly again. Legacy and unanswered questions. The Solway Spaceman remains one of the most famous unexplained images in British history. It's been analysed by Kodak engineers, photography experts, astronomers, and paranormal investigators. It's appeared in books, TV shows, and documentaries across the world. And still we have no answers. If it was just a photo glitch, why the strange government visit? If it was someone in costume, how did they appear in only one shot? If it was nothing at all, why are we still talking about it, 60 years on? Sometimes the mystery isn't just in what we see. It's in the way something shouldn't be there. In the blank space between memory and evidence. In the chill that runs down your spine when a photograph refuses to lie. So if you're ever in Burgh Marsh and the air grows still, smile for the camera, because someone might just be standing behind you. Chapter 8. The Warminster Thing, 1965. The market town of Warminster in Wiltshire is not the sort of place you'd expect to find yourself at the centre of an extraterrestrial mystery. Surrounded by green hills and ancient barrows. It's the kind of English town where the most exciting thing on a Tuesday might be the arrival of the fruit lorry. People there tend to worry more about foxes in the bins than flying saucers in the sky. That is until Christmas of 1964, when the heavens opened, the air shook, and something truly inexplicable arrived. Locals didn't know what to call it, so they named it what they could. The Thing. The first report. It began in the early hours of December 25th, 1964, Christmas morning. A woman named Marjorie Bye was walking to church when she was stopped in her tracks by an unholy sound. It was a noise like nothing I've ever heard. A screech, like metal being torn apart and thunder exploding inside my skull. It pinned me in place. She said the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the sky, from the ground, from inside her own head. She clutched her ears and dropped to her knees. When it passed, she stumbled home, dazed and sick to her stomach. The local paper ran the story under the headline, "Woman Claims Christmas Morning Thing Assault." Most readers chalked it up to a bad pork pie or a touch of the flu. But then the reports kept coming. The sounds continue. Over the next few days, other townsfolk reported similar sensations, low-frequency humming that rattled windows but came from no visible source. Thuds and booms shaking walls in the dead of night. Vibrations underfoot, as if a giant engine pulsed beneath the soil. High-pitched tones that made dogs howl and children cry. Local authorities dismissed the claims as mass imagination, or perhaps distant artillery tests from Salisbury Plain. But no such tests were scheduled, and the strange activity only increased. The sky glows red. On January 3rd, 1965. Multiple residents of Boreham Field, a housing estate on the town's edge, reported a reddish glow in the clouds above the hills. It pulsed, then twisted into a spiral. One witness, ex-RAF gunner Fred Heaney, said, "I thought it was a flare, but it didn't fall. It hovered. And then it vanished, like a switch had been flicked." 2 hours later, more thuds, more ear-splitting hums, more terrified residents. Warminster was under siege. But from what? Enter the press. Local journalist Arthur Shuttlewood, a reporter for the Warminster Journal, took notice. Initially a skeptic, Shuttlewood began to investigate the phenomenon in earnest, interviewing residents, gathering dates and times, plotting patterns on a map. By spring 1965, he had collected over 50 first-hand accounts of unexplained aerial events or auditory attacks. The national press picked up the story. The Daily Mirror dubbed Warminster the town that hears things. Soon, UFO enthusiasts began arriving with binoculars, cameras, and thermos flasks. And then came the first clear sighting, the cigar in the sky, on August 17, 1965. A group of 7 witnesses on Cradle Hill observed what they described as a cigar-shaped object, grey and glowing, hovering above the fields. It made no sound but cast a faint shadow on the ground. Then it moved, with incredible speed, shooting across the horizon in a smooth, impossible arc. The moment it vanished, the group reported a deep, sub-audible rumble in the earth, like thunder through stone. Arthur Shuttlewood wrote, X. There can be no doubt that a force unknown to modern science is operating in the skies above Warminster. We have entered a new age of visitation. The thing had become real, and now it seemed it had company. A town transformed. By the end of 1965, Warminster was no longer a sleepy backwater. It had become Britain's unofficial UFO capital. Every weekend, cars lined the roads leading to Clay Hill, Cradle Hill, and the mysterious Star Hill, all said to be hotspots for sightings. Locals sold tea and biscuits to the crowds. An enterprising shopkeeper began selling "I Survived the Warminster Thing" t-shirts. Shuttlewood published his first book, The Warminster Mystery. Police had to redirect traffic due to the volume of amateur skywatchers. And the sightings continued. Balls of light, floating orbs, sudden gusts of hot air, photographs of glowing discs, audio recordings of static bursts and mechanical whining. The scientific response. Predictably, the scientific community offered more sober explanations. Meteor showers, military aircraft from RAF Boscombe Down, weather balloons, mass hysteria, fueled by media and social contagion. But none of these explained the full scope of the phenomena. Meteor showers don't produce humming. Weather balloons don't change direction mid-air. Mass hysteria doesn't rattle buildings. And then there was the issue of radiation. The hot ground. In March 1966, a local scout group discovered a circular patch of scorched earth near Battlesbury Hill. The grass was burnt in a perfect ring, 18 feet across. Soil samples taken by an amateur chemist showed slightly elevated radiation levels. Not dangerous, but unusual. No explanation was given. The Ministry of Defence declined to comment. Shuttlewood, of course, was convinced. These are the landing sites. The Earth speaks if only we listen. Skeptics rolled their eyes, but the mystery refused to go away. The decline. By the late 1970s, the sightings began to dwindle. Perhaps the novelty wore off. Perhaps the visitors, if they were ever real, moved on. Or perhaps people simply stopped paying attention. Arthur Shuttlewood died in 1996. His archives, filled with hundreds of typed witness statements, were donated to a local museum. But even today, you can meet old-timers in Warminster who'll shake their heads and say, "It was real. I heard it. I saw it. You can't tell me otherwise." Legacy of the Thing. The Warminster Thing remains one of the most enduring and well-documented mass paranormal events in British history. It wasn't just one sighting. It was years of them. It wasn't just one witness. It was hundreds. It wasn't just a flying saucer. It was a presence, a sound, a tremor, a feeling, a a thing. So if you ever find yourself on a Wiltshire hillside at dusk, looking out over the folds of Warminster, you might wonder, was it just wind and fog? Or is something still up there, listening, waiting, watching? Chapter 9. The Hexham Heads, 1971. In the north of England, just west of Newcastle, sits the town of Hexham, a place steeped in Roman history and old stone walls, where the land feels ancient and the wind carries secrets. And in one modest terraced house in 1971, two boys were digging in their back garden. What they found should have been of little consequence. Two small stone heads. But these heads, strange, crude, and cold, would spark one of the most bizarre and chilling supernatural sagas Britain has ever known. A tale of moving objects, wolf creatures, possession, and terror. This, dear listener, is the story of the Hexham Heads. Unearthing trouble. It was February 1971. Brothers Colin and Leslie Robson, aged 11 and 9, were clearing weeds and shifting rubble in the back garden of 3 Reed Avenue, a plain brick home in the middle of a white Hexham cul-de-sac. As they dug, their trowels struck something hard. At first, they thought they were rocks. But as they brushed away the soil, the rocks took shape. 2 small carved heads, about the size of tennis balls, roughly chiseled from grey-green stone, both with primitive human features, flat noses, wide eyes, gaping mouths. One had long, roughly carved hair. The other was bald. They were odd, unsettling, but curious. The boys took them inside to show their mother. Strangeness begins. From the moment the heads entered the house, things began to change. Small objects started to move on their own. Doors opened and closed without wind or draught. Glasses shattered without being touched. Footsteps were heard in the night, soft, bare footsteps on carpeted floors. And then there were the shadows. Robson began to feel watched. Colin said he saw a grey figure standing in his doorway at night, motionless, silent. Then came the smell, an overpowering scent of wet earth and decay lingering in the hallway. It would appear without warning and vanish just as suddenly. The family, spooked, reached out to local historians. They thought the heads might be Roman artifacts, but the real horror was just beginning. The Wolfman. One night, a neighbor, Mrs. Dodds, was walking home when she saw a creature near the Robsons' fence. It looked like a man, but it was bent forward, on all fours. It had a head like a dog or wolf, snout, ears, glowing eyes. I dropped my shopping and ran. The Robsons heard the scream. The boys cried through the night. 3 days later, another sighting, this time by a delivery boy. A man-shaped figure with animal features, seen crouched beside the bins. It leapt the fence in a single motion and disappeared into the alley. Some believed the creature was guarding the heads. Others thought it had been summoned. Academic involvement. The heads eventually came into the possession of Dr. Anne Ross, a respected Celtic scholar and anthropologist with an interest in British folklore. She was no sensationalist. Her work was rigorous. Her expertise on ancient pagan beliefs made her a sought-after commentator. When the heads arrived at her Oxfordshire home, she examined them carefully. She believed they were Celtic in origin, perhaps fertility charms or household totems. But within days, she too noticed strange activity. I awoke one morning to find every light in the house switched on. Doors had opened. My dog refused to enter the room where the heads were kept. Her teenage daughter claimed to see a tall black figure standing at the end of her bed, wolfish in appearance, silent, unmoving. Dr. Ross, shaken, eventually returned the heads to the Robsons. The disturbances stopped. The curse theory. By now, some were calling the Hexham Heads cursed. The theory? That they were ancient protective idols, intended to ward off evil by binding a spirit inside. When disturbed, the spirit was released. Others pointed to the local landscape. Hexham is known for its Roman ruins, pagan artifacts, and tales of shapeshifters. Ancient burial sites dot the area. Could the heads have been grave markers, guardians, One folklorist noted the recurring theme of beast-like sentinels in Celtic lore, half-human, half-animal creatures tasked with protecting the dead. Was the Wolfman a manifestation of this myth, or something real? The hoax accusation. Years later, a man named Des Craigie came forward, claiming he had carved the heads in 1956 as a prank. He said they were made from concrete, not stone, and fashioned using a file and chisel while he worked at a nearby building site. He insisted he had buried them in the Robson's garden himself. But when the heads were retested by archaeologists, they found conflicting evidence. The stone did not match the composition Craigie described. The patina, natural weathering, suggested greater age, and the paranormal events had already occurred before his confession. So was Craigie lying, trying to cash in on the fame? Or was his version true, and the heads only seemed ancient because of the hysteria surrounding them? The disappearance, eventually. The heads were sent to the British Museum for study, then to Southampton University, and then they vanished. To this day, no one knows where the original Hexham Heads are. Replicas exist, but the true artifacts have disappeared into the fog of bureaucracy and rumor. Some say they were quietly destroyed. Others believe they're locked away in a private collection, and some whisper that they were returned to the earth, buried once more to keep the spirit at rest. Aftermath. The Robson family eventually moved away from Hexham. Dr. Ross continued her academic career, but refused further comment on the incident. The Wolf Man was never seen again, but those who handled the heads, who felt their weight and heard the whispers in the dark, don't doubt what they saw. So next time you dig in your garden and unearth something old, something with eyes, handle it with care. Some things are buried for a reason. Chapter 10. The Enfield Poltergeist. 1977-78. It was just another council house on a quiet street in North London. Ordinary red brick, netted curtains, a front garden with weeds in the cracks, children's bulks on the path, a TV flickering through the window. Nothing about 284 Green Street stood out, until one night in 1977, when something inside decided to make itself known. A presence, a noise, then a bang. Then the toys moved, the furniture shook, the voices began. And so began the case of the Enfield Poltergeist, Britain's most famous haunting. The Hodgson family. Peggy Hodgson was a single mother of 4. Her children, Margaret 13, Janet 11, Johnny 10, and Billy 7, were lively, clever, and full of questions. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom semi in Enfield, trying their best to make ends meet after their father walked out. It was a happy home, if a little chaotic. The kids argued over the telly. Peggy worked late shifts. There was always a bit of noise. But starting on the night of August 30th, 1977, that noise became something else. Strange beginning. It began with a rattle. Janet and Johnny were in bed when they heard scraping inside the wall. They thought it was mice. Then it grew louder, knocking, and then a chest of drawers slid across the room. Peggy, thinking the children were playing up, marched upstairs, but when she tried to push the chest of drawers back, it wouldn't budge, as if something held it in place. Moments later, it moved again, this time unaided, slowly, deliberately. She grabbed the children and ran to the neighbor's house. I know what furniture sounds like when it moves. I know when my kids are acting up. This wasn't that. It was cold. The air was wrong. The police were called, then the press, then the investigators, and what they found still divides opinion to this day. Enter the SPR. The case was taken up by the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, an organization with a long history of investigating hauntings. 2 investigators, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, were assigned to the Hodgson house. They would end up spending months there, recording, photographing, and witnessing events that even now defy easy explanation. The phenomena. Here's what they reported. Furniture moved without human contact. Chairs tipped backwards. Tables flipped. A heavy curtain rail was ripped from the wall. Knocking and rapping sounds came from the walls, ceilings, and floorboards, loud enough to be heard from the street. Objects were thrown across rooms, sometimes in full view of investigators. A Lego brick once hit Gross so hard it left a bruise. Cold spots appeared and vanished. Thermometers dropped suddenly. Disembodied voices echoed through the house, harsh, gravelly, and coming from nowhere. But most unsettling of all was what happened to Janet. Janet and the voice. Soon after the activity began, Janet began to enter trance-like states. Her eyes would roll back. She'd speak in a deep, guttural voice, one that sounded nothing like an 11-year-old girl. "My name is Bill. I used to live here. I died in that chair, had a hemorrhage, couldn't breathe." Investigators recorded hours of the voice. Sometimes it spoke through Janet, while her mouth remained closed. Sometimes it answered questions she had no way of knowing. When asked how he died, Bill described choking, falling unconscious, and then dying. A few weeks later, a former tenant confirmed that Bill Wilkins, an old man who once lived in the house, had died exactly that way. Janet said she had never heard the name before. Media frenzy. As word spread, the media descended. Headlines blared. Haunted house of horror. Ghost child speaks from the grave. I lived with a poltergeist. TV crews filmed Janet levitating from her bed. Photographs captured her mid-air, arms flailing, mouth open in terror. Critics said she was jumping. Others said something was lifting her. Neighbors, friends, even local police officers reported strange noises, flying objects, and chilling cold in the house. Still, not everyone was convinced. Skepticism and accusations. The case quickly drew criticism. Some claimed Janet was faking the voice, using a false vocal fold technique. Others pointed to moments where the children were caught bending spoons or throwing pillows. Even the SPR admitted that some of the events were staged by the children, particularly when bored or under pressure. But Gross and Playfair maintained that the core phenomena were real and couldn't be explained by trickery alone. You must separate the noise from the signal. Even if 10% was faked, that leaves 90% unaccounted for. And that 90% included witnesses with no stake in the matter. Police officers, journalists, schoolteachers, even a local lollipop lady. The end of the haunting. By 1979, the activity began to subside. Janet was sent to a boarding school for a time, and the house gradually returned to normal. The family remained in the home until the mid-1980s. After they moved out, subsequent tenants reported no unusual activity. Janet later described her experiences as real, but said she felt used by the media and misunderstood by skeptics. Yes, some things we faked, but not all of it. Not the voice, not the fear. It lived with us. Legacy. The Enfield case has inspired documentaries, films, books, and debate for nearly half a century. To believers, it is the best documented haunting in British history. To skeptics, it's a case study in childhood mischief and media gullibility. To everyone else, it remains one of the strangest episodes ever recorded in a London council house. So next time you hear something not once, then twice, then 3 times, remember, some houses keep their secrets. And some whisper them through the walls. Chapter 11. The Screaming Skulls of Derbyshire. Derbyshire, land of limestone dales, ancient abbeys, and whispering moors. Beneath its rolling hills lie Roman roads, lost mines, and secrets older than Christianity. But some say there are things in Derbyshire best left undisturbed, particularly a skull, or in some cases, 2. Because here, scattered among village manors and remote cottages, are tales of screaming skulls, human remains that wail, groan, and unleash havoc when anyone dares to bury them. The Curse of Bettiscombe. Though often associated with Dorset, one of the best documented screaming skulls made its second home in Derbyshire, hidden away after years of unrest. The story begins at Bettiscombe Manor, where in the 17th century, a Jamaican servant, possibly enslaved, died while in the care of the Pinney family. On his deathbed, he begged, "Bury me in my homeland, or I will not rest." But his wish was ignored. He was buried in the local churchyard, and that's when the screaming began. The house shook with moans at night. Doors slammed themselves. Grotesque howls echoed down the stairwells. Illness spread among livestock. Windows shattered. Eventually, the body was exhumed. All but the skull was reburied. The head was placed in a niche in the attic. The noises stopped. When it was moved decades later to a family home near Bakewell, the activity returned. And when the skull was hidden in a cupboard, the cupboard split in two. Wardlow Myers, the silent witness. In the tiny hamlet of Wardlow Myers, a skull was discovered in the late 1800s inside the walls of an old coaching inn. It had no label, no markings, but it was wrapped in silk, carefully placed in a recess, and sealed behind bricks. When a local landowner removed it, out of curiosity, nothing more, he placed it on his mantelpiece. That night, the dogs howled. The grandfather clock stopped, and the man reported hearing whispers in the stone walls, a woman's voice, repeating, "I saw it. I saw what he did." A local historian made the connection. In 1815, a young maid named Anne Brown had been murdered by a travelling salesman near Wardlow Myers. Her body was discovered. Her head was missing. The murderer was executed, but the skull was never found. Until now, the landowner tried to return it to the wall, but it wouldn't stay. Each time he bricked it back in, the skull was outside again the next morning, perched in the hearth, or sitting in his armchair. Eventually, he placed it in a wooden box and locked it in the cellar. He died weeks later, with scratches on his face and the words, "She knew," written in chalk on the cellar door. The legend of Millersdale. In Millersdale, the tale is told of a skull that belonged to a monastic traitor executed during the dissolution of the monasteries. The monks, outraged at his betrayal, supposedly cursed his remains, damning anyone who would disturb them. For years, the skull remained hidden in a chapel crypt, until a local archaeologist retrieved it in the 1920s. The moment it was moved, odd things began to happen. Milk soured in unopened bottles. Horses refused to pass the chapel path. A nearby baptismal font cracked straight down the middle. The archaeologist, deeply shaken, returned the skull, but he claimed it laughed, an eerie, echoing sound, as he sealed it back beneath the flagstones. Screaming skull science. Can skulls really scream? The scientific community, unsurprisingly, says no. The phenomenon is often chalked up to acoustics. Old houses creak, moan, and amplify sound. Confirmation bias. Once a skull is associated with fear, every bump in the night seems supernatural. Myth-making. Tales passed down and shaped over time. But that doesn't explain everything. In 1981, researchers from Derby University conducted an acoustic survey at a farmhouse reportedly haunted by a skull. Their recordings picked up low-frequency humming, phantom footsteps, and, in one session, a burst of high-pitched static resembling a human scream. No other devices were in the house. No people upstairs. The skull was placed in a sealed glass case at the time. When skulls return, in many of these tales, the same theme repeats. 1. A skull is found. 2. It is moved or buried. 3. Strange phenomena begin. 4. The skull is returned to its rightful place. 5. Peace follows. This has led some to believe that the skulls are anchor points, objects through which spiritual unrest manifests. To remove them is to invite the storm. To return them is to restore balance. The modern era. Today, most of the screaming skulls are hidden, forgotten, or deliberately locked away. A few remain in museums, like the Bakewell Folklore Collection, which stores a possibly haunted skull in its archives, available by appointment only. The Derbyshire Ghost Society maintains a list of suspected screaming skull locations. They claim there are at least 7 in the county, undocumented, unverified, but spoken of in hushed voices. One anonymous farmer told them, quote, "You can take any part of the body you like, leg, arm, spine, but not the head, never the head. So, if you ever come across a skull in an attic, a wall, or a box beneath the floor, leave it be. And if you hear something in the night, something cold and high and inhuman, don't go looking for its source. Some voices, once disturbed, never stop screaming." Chapter 12. The Owlman of Mawnan Church, 1976, Cornwall. Land of smugglers' coves, Arthurian ruins, and mist-laced cliffs. It's a place where sea legends live and old gods sleep in hedgerows. And high on a coastal hill, nestled among dark trees and weather-worn graves, sits St. Mawnan's Church. An ancient place, quiet, remote, but in the summer of 1976, that silence was broken by a pair of girls, a scream, and the sighting of something that should not exist. They called it the Owlman. The first sighting. It was April 17th, Easter weekend. Sisters June and Vicky Melling, aged 12 and 9, were on holiday with their parents in Cornwall. That morning, they took a short walk through the woods near the village of Mawnan Smith. Their parents remained nearby, unpacking a picnic. Then came the scream. June came racing down the path, dragging Vicky by the arm. Both girls were crying, hysterical. Their father, baffled and alarmed, demanded to know what had happened. Quote, "We saw a big bird, a huge bird man. It had wings and red eyes. It hissed at us. We thought it was going to take Vicky." The girls described a creature at least 6 feet tall, feathery, with glowing red eyes, talon-like claws, and wings as wide as the church roof. Their father, unnerved, cut the holiday short. They left Cornwall that very night. Quote, Tony Doc Shields gets involved. A few weeks later, a local paranormal researcher named Tony Doc Shields caught wind of the Mawnan sighting. Shields was no stranger to strange. He had already investigated Cornish sea serpents and claimed psychic contact with a Loch Ness-type creature named Morgar. When the Melling story reached him, he visited the site and left notes in nearby phone boxes and shops, asking for any further information. What came next shocked even him. More sightings. July 3rd, 1976. 2 girls, Sally and Barbara, camping in the woods behind the church, reported a terrifying encounter. It was watching us from the trees. It had claws on the ends of its wings. It made a screeching noise like metal. We ran, and it flew after us, just a bit. It was like it wanted us to leave. August 1978, a young boy named Gavin was exploring the churchyard with his older brother when they spotted a dark thing crouching atop the church tower. As they watched, it unfurled its wings and leapt into the air, without a sound. 1989, a woman walking her dog near the site claimed the animal became frantic, growling at the woods. She turned and saw what she described as a thing with feathers and hands. It wasn't an owl. I've seen owls. This was bigger, broader, more like a man, a thing dressed in feathers, crouching like it owned the place. The description. From all accounts, the creature was described as between 5 and 7 feet tall, large dark grey or black wings, huge glowing red or orange eyes, widely spaced, a beak-like or pointed face, legs ending in clawed, bird-like feet, sometimes making hissing or screeching noises. Despite the number of sightings, the Owlman never attacked anyone. But it frightened them deeply. Owl or something else? Skeptics quickly weighed in. Could it have been a European eagle owl? They're massive, nearly 6 feet wingspan, and can hiss or screech when threatened. One escaped from a falconry centre not far from Mawnan Smith in the 1970s. But the upright stance, human-like limbs, and the ability to launch silently from the church roof don't quite fit. Other explanations included a man in a costume, though the location was isolated and hard to reach, mass hysteria, nightmares and suggestibility, especially among young witnesses, a clever hoax by Shields, a controversial figure known for exaggeration. Yet even Shields later claimed he never fabricated the sightings and had simply recorded what was reported to him. Mawnan's other secrets. St. Mawnan's Church is old, very old. The site dates back to the 13th century, possibly earlier. It's built atop older Celtic holy ground. The surrounding woods are thick, dark, and untouched by modern development. Locals speak of other strange happenings in the area. Flickering lights in the trees, sudden temperature drops near the church tower, a shadowy figure that moves along the treetops never touching the ground. Some suggest the Owlman is not a cryptid, but a guardian spirit or a warning, a local Mothman, if you will. He appears to the young, frightens them off, but he never harms. Perhaps he's saying, this place is not for you. Okay, the sightings continue. Incredibly, sightings haven't stopped. The most recent report came in 2020, when a pair of paranormal vloggers claimed to see a figure with wings and red eyes standing on the church roof, only visible through night vision. They left the site immediately. The footage was grainy, unclear, as always, but the legend lives on. Tourists still visit the church. A sign at the gate makes no mention of the owlman, but the vicar once admitted, "I get asked more about that beast than I do about Christ." So what haunts the woods of Mawnan? A giant owl? A mutated raptor? A man in a suit? A ghost? A warning? Or simply fear made flesh in the minds of children? We may never know. But if you ever wander beneath the trees by the old Cornish church, and you hear a screech above you, and something large flutters in the shadows, don't look up. Just walk on. Chapter 13. The Flannan Isles Revisited, 1955. 20 miles west of the Outer Hebrides lies a cluster of jagged, sea-beaten rocks called the Flannan Isles. Cold, desolate, home to seabirds, squalls, and whispers on the wind, and more famously, the site of one of the greatest maritime mysteries in British history. You may know the tale. In 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished from Eilean Mòr without a trace. No sign of struggle, no bodies, just a half-eaten meal, a toppled chair, and a logbook full of stormy entries that didn't match the weather records. But what you may not know, dear listener, is that the story did not end there. Because in 1955, someone went back, and something was waiting. A return to Eilean Mòr. In the mid-1950s, the Northern Lighthouse Board decided to conduct a routine inspection of the old structures on Eilean Mòr. The lighthouse had since been automated, and the island hadn't been properly visited in years. A 3-man team, engineer Douglas Grant, technician Ronald Murray, and junior assistant Michael Fennick, was dispatched aboard the NLB tender Hesperus II. They were to spend 3 days on the island, repairing a faulty radio beacon, inspecting structural damage, and testing new equipment. The mission was routine, until it wasn't. The first night. The men arrived on May 3, 1955. The sea was calm. The cliffs were as forbidding as ever, sheer rock, echoing with gull cries. They set up camp in the old keeper's quarters, dusty, cold, but still intact. The radio beacon tower, just uphill, needed adjustment. Fenwick climbed it while the others secured the food supplies. That night, something changed. Felt uneasy, unnaturally quiet. Gulls vanished before dusk. Something wrong with the air. Fenwick complained of headaches. At 2:15 a.m., all 3 were awoken by a loud bang, like metal on stone. They assumed it was the generator failing. But when they investigated, the beacon tower was fine. But a metal toolbox, previously stored indoors, was now outside. 20 feet from the door. No one had moved it. The second day. The men pressed on. Murray worked to realign the beacon housing. Grant logged temperature readings. Fenwick ventured to the southern cliffs to photograph seabird activity. He returned, pale. "I thought I saw someone, standing on the edge, just staring, then gone." The island was supposed to be empty. No visitors, no boats. That night, the wind changed. It came from the east, against usual patterns. They heard footsteps on the stairs of the lighthouse, despite no one being inside. They heard scraping on the exterior wall, like fingernails on concrete. And at 3:42 a.m., the radio equipment cut out for 27 minutes. When it came back, it emitted a whistling pattern no one could explain. Morse code specialists later analyzed it. The signal repeated one phrase: "Where is the light?" The final day, May 5th, final inspections, packing up. At 11:40 a.m., Fenwick vanished. One moment, he was walking behind Grant, carrying a coil of cable. The next, he was gone. There was no scream, no sign of a fall, no blood. Just a coil of cable, lying neatly on the path. A frantic search followed. They combed the island, checked the cliffs, fired flares. At 3:15 p.m., Grant spotted movement in the lighthouse window. A silhouette. A man, tall, still, facing outward. They rushed up. The tower was empty, but the floorboards were wet. and there was a single bare footprint in the dust. Evacuation. Grant and Murray, shaken, contacted the mainland. The Hesperus, too, arrived by dusk. No trace of Fenwick was ever found. No explanation offered. He was officially listed as lost at sea, but both surviving men refused that account. He didn't fall. He didn't run. It was like he was erased. Murray left the lighthouse service within 6 months. Grant never returned to the Isles. The incident was buried in internal NLB logs. No press releases, no investigations, just silence. Patterns and parallels. The parallels to the 1900 disappearance were hard to ignore. 3 men on a remote isle, 1 inexplicable vanishing, disruptions to communication, auditory disturbances, a figure in the tower, a footprint left behind. What happened on Eilean Mòr? Once, twice. Some folklorists say the island is cursed, part of an old Celtic chain of forbidden stones, where sacrifices were once made to the sea gods. Others point to magnetic anomalies near the Flannan Isles, navigation errors, compasses spinning without cause, a few whisper of time slicks, dimensional folds, or echoes of fate where history attempts to repeat itself. The lighthouse today. Today, the Flannan Lighthouse stands automated, cold, silent. No one lives there. No one stays the night. Occasionally, a maintenance crew will make the trip, never alone, never unarmed. They say the place feels hollow, echoes twice, breathes when it shouldn't. So if you sail near the Flannans on a clear morning, and the sky turns suddenly grey, and your compass wobbles, and the radio cuts to static, be polite, don't look too long at the tower, and never ever ask, where is the light? Chapter 14. The Silent Roads of Suffolk, 2002. Suffolk is a gentle place. Rolling fields, crooked timber-framed houses, and hedgerows buzzing with bees in summer. Its roads twist like ribbons through history. Roman tracks, medieval cart routes, forgotten warpaths. And yet, in the stillness of its back lanes, some say the past never left. There are places in Suffolk, roads no longer on maps, where sound disappears, time distorts, and lone travelers find themselves utterly, eerily alone. Welcome to the mystery of the silent roads. The incident at Freston. On a warm evening in June 2002, university student Claire Harding was driving home from Ipswich after visiting a friend. She took a scenic route through the villages of Freston and Wolverstone, roads she'd driven many times before. At around 10:45 p.m., her car entered a narrow lane lined with tall hedgerows and overhanging oaks. The radio, playing softly, cut out. Then the engine spluttered, just for a moment. And the world went silent. And yet, it didn't even hear the tires. It was like I'd driven into a vacuum. No birds, no wind, no engine hum. Just silence. Thinking she'd entered a patch of poor reception, she rolled down the window. No breeze, no insects, not even the ticking of the engine cooling down. And then she noticed something else. The stars were gone. The sky was black. Not cloudy, just black. She turned on her full beams. Ahead, the road was smooth, but flanked by stone markers she didn't recognize. And in the distance, a bicycle slowly crossing the lane. The ghost cyclist. The cyclist was dressed in old-fashioned attire. Flat cap, dark jacket, long trousers tucked into socks. He never looked up. As Claire slowed the car, she blinked once, and he was gone, vanished. The road returned to normal. The stars reappeared. The radio crackled back to life. She drove home shaken. 2 weeks later, while recounting the event to her grandfather, he said, "Ah, you've driven the road where the boy died." The 1938 fatality. On October 3, 1938, a local delivery boy named George Harrington, age 14, was struck by a car while cycling along the Freston back road. He died instantly. His bicycle was found twisted at the hedgerow. The car's driver, never identified, was believed to be a wealthy landowner's son, who fled the scene. Local legend claims George's ghost can still be seen crossing the road at night, eternally trying to finish his route. But what Claire experienced wasn't just a ghost. It was something larger, something that left her senses hollow. More reports surface. Following Claire's account, the East Anglian Daily Times received letters from readers describing similar experiences. Peter Winstanley, lorry driver, 1997. The cab went dead. Radio off. Even my breath sounded wrong. Mary Wexford, cyclist, 1989. Felt like I was in a box. Everything muffled. Then a black car passed me with no sound. Trevor Bullen, walker, 1972. I saw a cart pulled by a horse, clear as day. Man in a cloak. Then it blinked out. Each report described sudden silence, missing stars or distorted light, a glimpse of a person, vehicle, or object from the past, abrupt return to normalcy. The locations? Always within a 3-mile radius of Wolverstone. The Suffolk timefold theory. Some paranormal researchers believe this area may be subject to a rare atmospheric condition, what's colloquially called a timefold. This theory posits that past events, under certain environmental circumstances, replay, like echoes, visible and audible to those present. Similar theories have been applied to other UK locations. Bold Street, Liverpool. Alleged slips into the 1950s. RAF Montrose, Scotland. Sightings of WW1 pilots. Bath, Somerset. Roman soldiers seen marching through basements. Could Suffolk's silent roads be another such site? We're beginning to accept that time may not always flow linearly. Certain locations seem to trap emotional residue, particularly where trauma or routine once existed. George Harrington rode the same path every day. Over and over. Routine. Finality. His passage, some say, was burned into the road itself. Physical effects. Some who've passed through the silence describe more than just odd sounds. Memory lapses, sudden nosebleeds, temporary confusion, missing time. In 2006, motorcyclist Damien Rowe claimed he lost over 10 minutes on the Freston bypass. He activated a stopwatch app as part of a fuel economy test. The ride should have taken 4 minutes. When he arrived, the app showed 15:42 had passed. No idea where it went. I never slowed, never stopped, just blank. His dashcam footage? Black screen, then normal again. Possible explanations. Environmental factors have been proposed. Low-frequency infrasound from underground water sources may cause disorientation. Magnetic field anomalies might interfere with brain function. Carbon monoxide pockets? Unlikely on open rural roads. Others believe the area contains a thin spot, a veil, to use the folkloric term. A place where past, present, and future briefly overlap. Think of it like tuning an old radio. Occasionally, the dial hits the wrong frequency. You get a station that shouldn't be there, a voice from another time. Recent activity. In 2023, a couple hiking near Colomer's Lane filmed an odd fog patch, despite a clear forecast. Their dog refused to enter. Their watch batteries died. And when they later reviewed the footage, a blurred silhouette appears, walking across the road, then disappearing. The video is inconclusive, but consistent. Suffolk's roads remain quiet, peaceful, unassuming. But take a wrong turn on a warm summer evening, and you may find yourself somewhere and somewhen else. If the stars disappear, if the air goes still, if your engine coughs, keep your eyes on the road, and pray that what you see ahead is just another traveller. Chapter 15. The Time Slips of Liverpool, 1996 to present. Liverpool, home of the Beatles, bustling docks, red brick terraces, and the hum of Mersey industry. It's a modern city with Victorian bones, a port built on movement, people, goods, stories. But beneath the shops and pavement of its commercial core lies something stranger, something older, a patch of time that doesn't always behave. Because in Liverpool, especially around Bold Street, people keep slipping. Not into puddles, but into the past. The 1996 Bold Street incident. On a bright afternoon in 1996, Frank, a retired police officer, and his wife Carol were shopping on Bold Street. They split up briefly. Carol ducked into Dylan's bookshop, and Frank wandered down the street toward Waterstones. But as Frank approached the corner, he felt a jolt. The air shimmered. The noise of the city, The cars, chatter, and footsteps dulled. He blinked, and the street looked different. The cars were older, people dressed like it was the 40s. I saw a bus with Liverpool Corporation on the side. And the bookshop, it was called Crit's. Puzzled, Frank stepped inside. The shelves were stacked with books, but no modern covers, no plastic. The till was mechanical. A woman in a green dress stared at him, confused. Then came another jolt, like a pressure drop, and suddenly he was back. The sound returned. The signs had changed. He was in front of Waterstones again. Carol came out moments later, puzzled why he looked pale. Crit's the bookshop. There really was a Crit's bookstore, a well-known Bold Street shop that closed in 1951. Frank had never heard of it, but he described the signage, layout, and uniforms with perfect accuracy. Skeptics suggested he had read about Crit's subconsciously, and that a micro-seizure or brief hallucination caused the experience. But Frank wasn't alone. More slips. Over the years, more people came forward. Emily G., 2001, entered a clothing shop that didn't exist on the modern high street. Inside, mannequins wore post-war fashion. The store vanished behind her when she stepped out. Mark H., 2006, claimed to see a tram, not a bus, on the tracks outside Central Station. Liverpool's tram system was dismantled in 1957. Darrell and Sean, 2011. Two students who claimed they walked through an alley behind Renshaw Street and emerged into a cobbled lane with gas lamps. A milk float passed them. The air smelled of coal smoke. The street was gone when they returned 2 hours later. Most were independent, unconnected, and unaware of the phenomenon before their encounter. Time slip mechanics. Theories abound. 1. Faulty memory. Some believe these are confabulations, mental glitches reinforced by suggestion. But many witnesses accurately describe buildings and businesses that haven't existed for decades. 2. Residual energy. Like the stone tape theory, where emotional or routine energy imprints on a location, replaying like a recording. But in Liverpool, the slips aren't passive, they're immersive. You don't see a ghost. You are there, walking, hearing, smelling, touching. 3. Temporal overlap. A more extreme theory suggests certain locations are prone to space-time overlaps, like cracks in the clockwork. Think of time as stacked sheets of paper. Most stay flat, but in rare cases, a crease or fold allows two moments to briefly touch. This may explain the disorientation, sudden jumps, and why only specific zones, like Bold Street, report such events. Common elements. Across all reports, several elements remain consistent. Abrupt sensory shift, especially sound dampening. Short duration, from seconds to minutes. Visual cues, old cars, signage, clothes, newspapers. Sudden return, often accompanied by a pressure change or tingling sensation. Overlapping structures. Modern and old buildings align closely in shape or footprint. Some also report a watched feeling, or glimpsing people who stare back, confused. Are the witnesses seeing ghosts? Or are they the ghosts, briefly seen in the past? The girl in the shawl. One recurring figure appears in multiple accounts. A young girl in a wool shawl, standing near the corner of Church Street. She never speaks, never moves, just stares. 2 witnesses, a decade apart, described making eye contact with her. Both felt a pulling sensation, as if they'd nearly stepped too far. She may be a warning. Or an anchor. Or perhaps, she's someone who slipped, long ago, and never came back. Skepticism and psychology. Critics argue that Bold Street slips can be explained through cryptomnesia, the resurfacing of long-forgotten memories. Hypnagogia. Vivid hallucinations during sleep-deprived states. Urban myth reinforcement. People embellishing their experience after hearing similar tales. But the number of cases, many from well-documented sources before the phenomenon was widely publicized, gives pause. Also notable, most witnesses genuinely believe what they experienced. Many avoid the area afterward. Some refuse to discuss it at all. Recent developments. In 2022, a documentary crew filming a ghost hunting series in Bold Street recorded EMF fluctuations, spontaneous battery drain, and a brief audio anomaly, a clip of jazz music, faintly audible. Where no music was playing. The music was later identified as a 1947 recording from a nearby club. No speakers were present. The audio lasted 12 seconds, then silence. Time is a river, we're told. But what if, just here, just briefly, it pools in strange eddies? What if, as you step off the curb, you don't just cross the street, you cross the century? So next time you're in Liverpool, and the world dims for just a moment, when the air grows heavy and your footsteps go silent, look around. Is the corner cafe where you left it? Are the signs written in the right font? And if you see the girl in the shawl, don't follow. Epilogue, a nation of shadows and wonder. So, dear listener, we've walked the haunted lanes of Suffolk, climbed the lonely rocks of the Flannan Isles, and stood in the whispering churchyards of Cornwall. We've heard the knocks on Green Street's walls, seen the black flash race across Cannock Chase, watched silent bombers pass over Derbyshire skies, and stared into the blank, blinking eyes of the Hexham Heads. You might ask, were they real? Were they tricks of the mind? The wind? The fog? Were they lies? Were they echoes? Or just maybe, were they signs? Britain, for all its bustle and broadband, remains a landscape of ancient memory. A Roman road beneath your local high street, a burial mound hidden behind a retail park, a boundary stone lost in nettles, still feared by sheep. We live atop layers of belief, story, and residue, and sometimes, just sometimes, they bubble to the surface. A voice where there should be none, a figure on the stairs. A woman in 1940s dress stepping into a Tesco metro. These are not tales of monsters and murderers. They are tales of thinness, of that sliver between what is and what was, between reason and wonder. So next time the wind changes, next time your radio cuts out mid-sentence, next time a bird won't sing in the garden, pause, listen. You may be walking a path trodden once before, by someone who never quite left. From the lighthouses of the Outer Hebrides to the silent crossroads of East Anglia, from the cobbled portals of Liverpool to the deep woods where owls wear the wrong face, this island remains, as it ever was, strange, beautiful, unexplained. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.